Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Liam Rose. I'm an author, mentor, life coach, motivational speaker, evangelist, musician, and activist. In this audio, we're going to be sharing spiritual teachings in the Spiritually Helping Other People podcast. I've been sharing spiritual teachings to help humanity find ways to help other people, help humanity to discover spiritual change, and help humanity to learn about the no self and selflessness. So, in this spiritual teaching, we're going to be talking about, which is called living your spiritual calling for Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha. Now, within life, we all have a calling that we're destined to do. Each human being has a spiritual calling on their life, and it's very important to discover that spiritual calling within your life. Now, the way you discover your spiritual calling is by going through a spiritual change. When you go through a spiritual change, you discover your spiritual calling. Each human being within life must follow their spiritual calling in order to do what Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha has called them to do. So, how do you find your spiritual calling? You have to go through the process of the 5 spiritual practices, which will help you to go through a spiritual change. Now, the 5 spiritual practices are prayer, meditation, mindfulness, walking, and journaling. Once you go through the 5 spiritual practices and go through a process of spiritual change, which the 5 spiritual practices will help you to do, then you need to live your spiritual calling. And the spiritual calling of what Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha has called us to do is to mainly help other people, give back, make a difference and a contribution, help the animals and help the universe in some way. So basically your spiritual calling should be doing things that contribute, help other people, give back, make a difference, make a contribution, help the animals, help the universe in some way. Now this is very, very important in life. A lot of people in life have never gone through a process of spiritual change, so they don't know what their spiritual calling or their spiritual life purpose is. So I'm encouraging the listeners, encouraging the viewers that are listening to this podcast. You must discover your spiritual calling. You must find what you've been put on this earth to do. Each human being has a different way of how they're going to work, because no two spiritual callings are the same. Each human being has a unique, specific spiritual calling on their life, and you must discover this within your life in order to do what Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha has called you to do. The spiritual calling becomes very, very important. And living for Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha is the most important thing. Nothing is more important than your relationship with Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha. So it's very, very important you live your spiritual calling. That basically means you should be helping other people, giving back and making a difference every single day of your life. Every single day of your life there should be contributions, helping other people, helping the animals, helping the universe in some way. And this is what your spiritual calling is all about. In life, it's about the contributions you do in life. It's not about the materialistic things or what you achieve out of life. That's not what life is all about. What life is all about is living your spiritual calling, doing the work for Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha, and making sure you're leaving your spiritual legacy within the world. As we're already aware that life is very short and life is very precious, no human being will live to thousands of years. So how you live your life day to day really matters to Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha. So it's very, very important you find your spiritual calling within life. If you don't find your spiritual calling within life, it means you're going to live a life of suffering, pain, and adversity, which is basically a life where you're unable to fulfill your spiritual calling on earth. So when you go through a spiritual change and when you go through a spiritual transformation, you will discover that the no self and selflessness becomes the most important thing. So The self is where the suffering, pain, and adversity in life comes from. So you have to overcome the self, which is very important, to discover the no self and selflessness. Now, it's very, very important to realize that the spiritual change becomes the most important thing. Your life doesn't change unless you go through a spiritual change. Your spiritual change is when you discover the no self and selflessness, and when you spiritually change your life to live for Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha. So it's very, very important you go through a spiritual change. If you don't go through a spiritual change, you can't discover your spiritual calling and your spiritual life purpose. Now, Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha is calling you to contribute in some way. Each human being needs to contribute, and you need to find what your unique spiritual gift and spiritual calling is and spiritual talents are. Each human being has specific skills and abilities that they need to use to do the work for Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha. Remember, your faith and your spirituality becomes very important. That's why you must go through a spiritual change. If you don't go through a spiritual change, you will live with suffering, pain, and adversities for all of your life. So the spiritual change becomes the most important thing. And the only way you spiritually change is when you develop the 5 spiritual practices. By developing the 5 spiritual practices, you'll go through a process of spiritual change. And when you spiritually change, you discover that the self is no longer irrelevant, and the no self and selflessness becomes important. Because life is about how many contributions you do in life, how many people you help, how many people you support, what difference you make, how many animals you support, and how you make the universe into a better place. So this is why the spiritual change becomes the most important thing. So to live your spiritual calling in life and to live your spiritual life purpose, you need to go through a spiritual change. And when you go through a spiritual change, that will connect you to Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha, and then you'll start to live your life very differently and spiritually and faithfully. But you must go through a spiritual change in order to live for Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha. This becomes the most important thing, and your life will not change unless you go through a spiritual change. If you don't go through a spiritual change, then you can't find your spiritual calling and your spiritual life purpose. And remember, the spiritual calling is all to do with helping others, helping the animals, helping the universe, helping humanity in some way. So you need to discover it within yourself. And remember, the light is already within you. You can discover the light of what you need to do for others within your life. And follow your spiritual life purpose, follow your spiritual calling, and do the work for Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha. So I hope this message has helped. I hope you do find your spiritual calling and live for Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha. Okay, thank you for listening now. Take care now. Bye now. Thanks.